We're WXRT and HD1 in Chicago, and I'm Terri Hemmert. When you hear SOS, you usually think of either a police song, send an SOS, or you think of being on a desert island and sending out an SOS. Well, sometimes kids who are caught up in some really difficult situations like no home, no family, they're sending out an SOS, and the response is SOS Children's Villages right here in Illinois, and it's a very interesting concept for foster care. It's a lot different than what you're used to hearing. So we thought we'd go to the top, talk to the boss about it, and we are joined today by Tim McCormick, who is the Chief Executive Officer of SOS Children's Villages in Illinois. Thank you for coming today.
Terri, thank you for having me, and thanks to all your listeners, too, for their help and participation in letting us tell our story today.
Great. And our listeners tend to be very compassionate people. I'm very proud of them, and very active people, and the kind of people that go outside their comfort zone and do things like foster care for children and do volunteer work. So I'm sure they'll be very interested in this. But let's explain. First of all, we've heard the saying, it takes a village. But this is literally villages. But I think some people might think, well, that means it's like we're warehousing the kids, just like in the old days where you'd fit a ton of kids that didn't have parents or didn't have homes in a big building, very impersonal, almost like a hospital setting. But this is very different. Your concept of village is very different.
Terri, you're right. It really is very different. And actually, it started because back after the Second World War, an Austrian medical student saw exactly that. He saw children being separated as brothers and sisters and put in boxcars and being sent off to these institutions, and said there has to be a better way. And at that point, it was the power of one. An individual called Hemmert said, let's look at something different. And the four pillars of the SOS Villages is really keeping brothers and sisters together so that they're not separated. And it is an individual home. It's a particular home. The other component that is really essential is it's a full-time foster parent. So we go out into the community and your community listeners and saying, come uproot your life, almost like the Peace Corps, and live in this intentional community, a village that we create of homes, and see your life being transformed as you transform another child's life. Mm-hmm. And so it's very particular to this notion of relationships that say when we invest in the beginning of the story, we get very different results.
Absolutely. And you say full-time foster parent. That doesn't mean that they leave the kids with a babysitter or send them to a daycare center and go off to work and then come home at night. They're full-time parents.
Yes, the novelty of this model is really what made our communities great and supportive. When the immigrant community came over to the United States, it was putting the child at the center of the social narrative of a community. And that's what we do in communities where there is a lot of other issues going on. So internationally, there's over 500 villages in 134 countries.
Wow.
Here in the United States, there's only Illinois and Florida where there are SOS villages. And Illinois leads this because we have 4 sites where we provide this unconditional love to children in need. Mm-hmm. So we have 18 homes out in Lockport, Illinois, where we've been operating for over 25 years. And we have 19 homes in the Auburn-Gresham neighborhood. And then our newest village is at Roosevelt, near Roosevelt and Racine, where we have 14 homes. And then we have another site where we do a lot of family strengthening services in the back of the yards. Mm-hmm. And in each one of these sites, where there's a number of issues going on, what we do is find the kindest hearts, similar to your listeners, where they come and say, we can make a difference, and provide this unconditional love to children who are most in need.
Well, it's interesting, too. I've seen photographs. Unfortunately, we can't show these on the radio. There are limitations, but I'm sure you have a website we'll send people to later on. They can see it for themselves. But this really is literally a village. It's single-family homes in a lot of cases. And so you have people living next door to other people that are going through the same problems and the same situations, and that must be wonderful too, because I think sometimes foster parents, not only do they have the stress of having a full-time job, but they also don't feel like they have the support even from a peer group, let alone from the professionals. But what kind of networking goes on with the people that have committed themselves to being full-time foster parents here?
So you're exactly right, Terri. That what occurs in our model for a person who would be willing to come and live in one of our homes in the village is we'll provide a number of resources for them. Some of those are material resources, so that if you have up to 5 or 6 children in your care, you have a minivan and you move kids to school and you do all the important things you do. But that's the easy part of it. The true part that makes a difference for us is that when that foster parent feels overwhelmed, there's 3 things that are really right outside their doorstep. There are their neighbors and other coworkers can say, what do I do at this point in time? How do we get through this? And the peer-to-peer support is essential. And then also in our community centers, we have a team of both clinicians who deal with behavioral health issues and caseworkers. And so in every case, then if that foster parent feels that things need some extra attention, in a traditional foster care model, you may have to wait for the caseworker to come into your neighborhood, maybe they're 3 to 4 days or even a week later. And in this model, they're literally right outside your door. So you get the best of both worlds. You have an individual home that doesn't look like an institutional setting, and right outside at arm's length, you have all the resources that you need.
Well, I'm very impressed that you try to keep the families together, the siblings together, because I think that's really important. I think that's one of the heartbreaking things of kids whose family has fallen apart for whatever reason, and they're separated from their siblings. That's just, for a kid from a family of 5, that's just a horrific concept. I mean, there were days I would be tempted to take that offer, 2 brothers, but seriously, that I think would be one of the most difficult things. Not only do you not, for whatever reason, have your parents, but you've lost your siblings too.
It's the second trauma that occurs when you enter into foster care. And sadly, of the over 400,000 children in foster care, 3 out of every 4, so 75% of the children who enter foster care are separated from their brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
And they've shown, University of Chicago studies have shown that when children are separated from their own siblings after the trauma, what occurs with their parents, then much of that other negative behavior begins to show up, including going on run. Because if I'm living with my younger brothers and sisters, I'm less prone to go away and leave them. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes children who are in situations that ultimately lead to foster care realize by staying together, that becomes the one strength that they have. And when it gets taken away, it even makes them more vulnerable.
Oh, it's the double whammy. Yeah, it's just unbelievable. Now, do you have single people as foster parents, or just married couples, or what's the breakdown of that?
So as you mentioned earlier, the most important criteria is the kind and good heart. Mm-hmm. And really, Terri, when we can no longer find these foster parents, it's really not a foster care issue. It's a real social issue in our country and in our neighborhoods. Our typical foster parent is a mom, is a woman. And about 80% of our homes are filled with single moms who have raised their children or may have one biological child that they're bringing into the village to share their living experiences. And then another 20% are couples. And what we look to do, like any community where you have blended communities of all sorts of living together, it's really amazing to see in these villages how this unconditional love transforms a lot of the normative myths that we have about each other, meaning race, sexual orientation, all those things move away when a child knows that this individual and these other individuals can provide this unconditional love. And so a child in an SOS village can really choose from a bunch of parents and can walk down the street and get advice from one of the moms on issues of dating and so on, and can get math homework 2 doors down and figure other things out. So it really provides for a child an array of resources that were one time absent.
Mm. Now, if a person moves into the village and becomes a foster parent, do they get a certain number of children? Is there a limit? Because maybe there are 4 kids, siblings living in one place. Maybe there are 4 kids that aren't related to each other. Does that happen?
Yes. And so in our model, we actually have today living in our villages sibling groups of 11 who are divided up into a couple of homes, and smaller sibling groups of 2 or 3. We tend to get from the Department of Children and Family Services referral of 3 or more children coming into our care, but our homes are licensed for up to 6 children. And what we try to do is to keep the children together as brothers and sisters, but oftentimes just because of space and accommodations, that may not happen during the first months of placements, and then we can reunify them. But either way, they're living right next door or right down the street from each other.
Now, foster care is different than adoption. And is there a problem when people come in and they are foster caring uh, however many children in your villages and they get to a point where they want to adopt that kid? Does that happen? And then what do you do?
It does happen, and we're always supportive of that. Many of the children who come into our care, and we care for children from 2 days old to up to 21, come in, and we get these referrals oftentimes with both physical and emotional trauma. The bonding that occurs between the foster parent and the children continues to get strong. And so when that foster parent says, look, I cannot turn these children over to someone else, we've gone too far together, we will work with that group of children and foster parents to move them to the next step, to the forever home. And we make all sorts of adjustments to our model, and we begin the whole process to look for employment. Some of our people have come back and worked with us part-time and full-time, and then to really successfully launch that family when that occurs.
And then they leave the village then?
Eventually, yes, so that the next kids who are in the shelter system can come in and do that, but it's a planned and intentional move. And it's a beautiful thing to see. As a matter of fact, I had lunch with a young man who was in our village for 12 years. He's now 24, and his younger brothers and siblings got adopted, and he still is. He's graduating, but not only high school but college, and he's become the model for his younger brothers and sisters who are much younger, who moved and got adopted by one of our parents.
Wow, that's great. Now, one of the problems with foster care in the traditional setting we have is the kids get, for one thing, they've had that trauma, whether it's a sudden act or just a really bad family situation that puts them in a position where they need foster care. They not only have that, there are all kinds of other issues. It's hard enough to raise a kid in the best of circumstances, with all the temptations and everything that goes on in our culture. But how you look at a lot of foster care kids, and they seem very troubled. They drop out of school. They get involved with drugs, all that kind of stuff. How does your village deal with those kinds of issues, and what's your success rate compared to the traditional foster care system?
So, Terri, and for your listeners too, that I think you put your finger on the pulse of something that the two things that happen with children oftentimes in foster care, not every, because there are some very good foster parents out there, and
Sure.
and many of your listeners may be those individuals, but for every year a child's in foster care in the United States, they may move twice. And so their education, and what we begin to teach young children in a very broken system at times is you don't have to be attached to any adult. And when a child no longer feels the emotional or physical or even psychological attachment to any adult, then they can do things on the streets that people seem to wonder why. And the sense of stability that we provide for the children is that this is now your home, and if things change, we're here, and it doesn't make a difference. And so we see very different results. Of the 400,000 kids in foster care, only 48% will graduate high school. For the last 12 years now, we've had 100% of our children graduating high school. And it's not by accident, but it's really by this village of not just our foster parents, but people like your listeners who volunteer, support us, and the tutoring to make that happen. 100% of our kids who will want to go to a college, we find them that college. And because we have to, and we're called to this, I think, as a society. And again, I've been able to see over time when we really do put our resources in at the beginning of a young life's important things happen. And the young man I was referring to, and other stories I could tell you, really, they're the first ones to break through the barriers in their families, to graduate high school, to go to college, to get stability. And it happens because all of us as a society says we can now invest in a very productive way for these children's lives.
It just seems such a healthier situation, The kid isn't being shuttled from place to place, and it's like a military family where the kid has to go to a different school every year, and even with their parents and the family intact, that's a strain on the kid. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've seen over time is that sense of stability and attachment. Look, all of us, including your listeners, got to a place in their lives because some adults believed in them. It may have been your parents, but it may have been grandparents, uncles, and aunts, but someone believes in you. Oftentimes in foster care, the children don't have that someone until they meet the right foster parent in the right setting. And our job at SOS is to find the best foster parents we can to believe in that child and to say, look, now you can trust someone, and not only this one person, but a whole village.
Wow. Now, if the young person graduates high school and wants to go on to college, they're still foster care. They haven't been adopted, but who pays for the college education then?
So a couple of things. Illinois has been a leader in a number of issues in foster care, and so you can stay on currently until you're 21 years old. And children in foster care will get significant support in the local state universities for the financial support and other support. It doesn't pay for everything, but it pays for a lot. Our donations pay for the additional needs of support. And so for those children, we provide that. But many children will say, I've gone for now as far as I want to go in school. I want to look at being a beautician. I want to become an electrician. I want to do that. And then we'll support that pathway too.
Right.
Because every child, I believe, eventually finds where they're going in this way. And our job is really to create the environment and to bring in some very good support, like really in telling the story today with you, for people to come engage and say, we can make a difference in this child. We can change that child's world, at least at this point in time.
Mm-hmm. Now, the villages are laid out a little differently depending on their location. Like clearly in a suburban area, you have single-family homes that are kind of clustered together and lots of space and yards and all that kind of stuff. In the city, it's more like row houses and maybe not even a continuum. So it's a village still, but like just physically a little less connected than a one in the suburb. What are some of the what's it like in your villages? Tell us what it's like to live in the village in the city and in one of the suburban villages.
Well, you're right. I think we've adapted kind of organically to the geography of what we were able to do and
Sure.
to create. But the essence of the village is really this sense of belonging and kind of commitment to be more than one. And I think one of the things I kid about in a village when our kids go off to college, I tell them that, look, if you survived a year in this village, you can survive any dormitory and anywhere across the country and make it happen. So
Sure.
you don't have to worry about that.
Uh-huh.
But I think what happens in the village is it's not that dissimilar to the old neighborhoods where everyone knew who these children were,
Right.
who they belonged to, what was going on. And the child felt in their design that there's an eye on them. I remember growing up on the south side of Chicago, and, this was before texting and blogging and that. If the McCormick kids did something, my mom knew about it
Oh, yeah.
somehow.
There was
through
always
the
a grandmother out on the porch.
There's a network of,
monitoring.
yes, the porch was the chat
Yeah.
room. And
Uh-huh.
and so it's really that sense that at the village, you do belong to something much more than yourself. And it provides you a lot of sense of identity and protection and stability. Now, on the other side of it, everybody knows your business. And
That's like living in a small town.
small town. But it has, there's trade-offs to that. And,
Yeah.
I've seen children who come into our care who have not had access to food, have not, they've hoarded food because they weren't looking at that. And it takes time to do the types of things we do. And what happens in every one of our villages is really three important things. One, we bring in this child who perhaps everyone looks at as lost and forgotten, kind of kicked to the curb. And it's not a stranger. This child belongs to us. And so that sense of hospitality is key. The second thing we do is we begin the process of healing, the emotional, the physical healing, and what we do. And then we put some important tools in their toolbox, and primarily around education and social skills.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what every village does, no matter how it looks.
And how do you handle the kid? I'm sure this happens. It's life. The kid that just isn't cutting it. They're having a lot of problems, serious problems. They need professional help. And how do you deal with a situation like that?
So I think it's really three things. One, because of this sense of village, we don't give up. And that's really key at the beginning of the story. Two, assessing and bringing in the right resources at the right time. And that's the sadness sometimes, is this at times the system's absent a village. Because at a village, I've got caseworkers, clinicians, full-time parent, everyone going into the school, everyone going into the healthcare provider saying, no, you have to do more for this child.
Right.
And the strength of what that is significant. And then the third thing is we listen and create opportunities for the child's voice to say something that's key. This young man I told you about who's graduated now and finishing off college, he came into our care. he told me I would only go to school when I wanted to fight or when I wanted to eat.
Mm.
And speed up the story, and he goes to a high school. He's graduating, an alternative high school, and he's a salutatorian. A year later, he's an RA in a college and a dormitory and doing that.
Wow.
And it doesn't happen by accident. It's by intention. But I think those resources make that happen.
You mentioned the term before, forever home, and I'm very familiar with that, being a pet lover, adopting animals and stuff. What's the process for a child or a family of siblings to move from the village into a forever home? How often does that happen, and what's the process there?
So it's really the intent of every child who comes in is either to go home or to find that permanent home, that forever home. The process is really through the courts, and so the first step is that the courts will determine that the parents' rights will be terminated. That's irrevocable. And then when that happens here in Illinois, a child can make a determination. If they're at 14 and above, they can make their permanency goal and say, I want to stay in this village, I want to stay here and get through and make that happen. And then via the courts, that's what will happen. Smaller children will say, no, that's really not an option. And it really isn't an option. It's really best for those children to find and normalize their life together when that's possible. So then the courts will say, okay, this is now into pre-adoption, if a kinship placement isn't a viability or a guardianship option. And then pre-adoptive parents will look and meet with the children, and we'll work with them, and then they'll move into the community, and then we'll continue to do the case management and the support to get those children to meet their goal.
And with adoption, do you have a priority still of keeping the siblings together?
Yes, and the state does and tries to look at that as the best option and best outcome.
Mm-hmm. Who pays for all this? Where does your funding come from?
Well, I was glad you asked that question there. So, in our operations, we're just under $12 million for our 4 sites and what we do. We're rated, and we're very proud of this, we're right at the top end of the Charity Navigator. We've been the top charity in Chicago twice in the last 5 years. So we manage our funds.
We even got a Mother Teresa award. I mean, how
Yeah.
many people can
Well,
say
yes,
that?
I know. Yes. So we're very good stewards of limited funds. We 87% of our funds come through the state and the Department of Children and Family Services, which we're grateful for. But that's always precarious because once there is a budget in Illinois, no one will know what that rate is.
What's a budget? I forget.
But
been
at the
so long.
time, there is a consent decree, so we're getting paid on time, and it's a good thing for our society that children are being cared for in the best way possible. Otherwise, it perpetuates other problems.
Sure.
But the real important way, for us to maintain and care the basics the state pays for us to transform that lives, we need the help of everyone in the community, including your listeners, to say, how can I become engaged and really enter into a journey, no matter how short or how long it is, to say we can all make a difference together. And I think, and I've seen this, and when we really only know ourselves when we look deep into the eye of a person who we think is a stranger, and we see our own reflections and how they see us. And that's really the model of the village, is to come and see the village, look into the eyes of these children, and oftentimes at the beginning of the story, eyes that might be dim, but ultimately we see the light come back in, and then you see the reflection of who you are, and you understand yourself and the child and the life better.
So for a person that's listening to this and they're thinking, this is fantastic, but I'm not in a position now where I can make a commitment to live in a village and be a full-time foster parent for whatever reason, but they'd like to help. What are do you need money? Do you need people to help with fundraising? Do you need volunteers?
So 3 things. You may not be that person, but good people know good people. I think the first thing I would ask your listeners is tell the story. And because you may be one-off for knowing someone who could be doing this and make that interest.
As a foster parent?
As a foster parent. Okay. And I think that would be a really good part of the story to help us.
So they're recruiting for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
Yes.
Yeah.
So your army of very kind listeners to get the word out. The second is to visit our website at sosillinois.org, and all spelled out as one word, Illinois there, and look and see how to donate or become engaged. And so not everyone also can give of their financial resources, but really we're all limited with 24 hours no matter how much money you have, but looking for ways to get engaged, or again, a business opportunity that might be looking at that. I really need and this is my plea to everyone, is to visit that website and to see how you can make that difference. I'm convinced, and I shared this on Friday with a group of people, as one person, we can't change the world. But as one person, we can change the world for another person. And all it is that action, that opportunities. And there's all sorts of good things we can do in this world. This is just one of them. And I would encourage your listeners to have the trust and the courage to visit that site and to see how that can happen.
We used to have a marketing slogan at XRT years ago, it was decades ago, and it's one that I've often told my students should be their mantra, but it was very seldom do you look at marketing slogans for that, but it was change the things you can. And it's like not just getting overwhelmed and thinking, well, I can't change the world, I think I'll just go home and, put on a movie or something. But change the things you can. This is something you can. This is doable. This is something tangible. The living as a full-time foster parent or helping you in what other ways. This is something people can do that really will have a direct impact on these children that need our support so desperately.
Well, and Terri, I believe the village is not confined by geography. It's a mindset.
Right.
And certainly, this opportunity to share with your listeners and to become part of this village movement. And again, it's happening across the globe. The SOS Children's Villages is the largest non-denominational child care provider in the world. Wow. And so the recipe has been working well for a while, and here we have these opportunities here in Illinois in the Chicagoland area to see it and to witness it and to become part of it really makes us better.
Absolutely. Well, I've been taking ribbing around here because I'm getting an honorary doctorate in a couple of weeks, and I stress the word honorary. You're getting a doctorate, and it's not honorary. Could you tell us, when wrapping up here, whatever possessed you to get into this line of work, and what's this doctorate going to do, and what your goals are?
Well, I was in healthcare for a long time and saw a number of issues going on within healthcare and said there has to be a better way. And I'm at Loyola in the area of ethics and finishing up there. So that's been my journey on the study of that. And we all have challenges in life. And I said to my kids, we all have unfinished business and we have to get to it. So that was the motivation factor. But it's also, I think, in all of our lives, Terri, there's a core to who we are and the things we do. And it oftentimes, I believe, in all of us, it comes out of goodness. And the way we can promote that goodness is a way to understand who you are. And for me, SOS Village has been that journey for the past 13 years of cultivating and creating opportunities and new sites for good things to happen by bringing good people together. And this is just another moment of that occurring.
Well, and it's certainly your Exhibit A on a purposeful life and how, following your passion and your heart and your ethics puts you in a good place. And you seem to be in the right place at the right time.
Well,
it's a lesson for everyone listening, really.
Well, I will say it's not by accident. I'm always talking to good people, Terri. Now I count you among those two with your honorary doctorate.
Yeah.
So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
That didn't happen by accident either.
Yeah. If you knew my grade point average, you'd be shocked. But anyway, we're about the end of our time. I knew this would go fast. But for people listening that want to get involved, or if we get people in Florida that listen to this radio station, and you said you had some villages there, but how do they get in touch with you again? What's the website?
So the best way to get in touch with us is through the website at sosillinois.org. So it's sosillinois.org.
And then you go to SOS Florida.
Yes, you can look at that one. Yes.
Okay, well, I wish you and your coworkers the best, because this is an issue that is so important. I mean, if we don't take care of our children, what's left? I mean, to me, that's like number one on the list.
Well, I think you're right, Terri. It reveals the moral fabric of who we are.
Yes, so. Absolutely. And these kids are going to be the future. So what we do now with these kids will totally impact the future. But thank you, Tim McCormick, Chief Executive Officer, and soon to be Dr. Tim McCormick. You won't have to ever call me doctor, by the way, because I didn't really earn it. I just kind of, it was my lucky day. But Tim McCormick, the Chief Executive Officer of SOS Children's Villages, Illinois. We wish you continued success with this. This is not just a pie-in-the-sky dream of somebody. This is actual 24/7 kids' lives changing because of this, and kids' lives getting better, and kids going to school, and kids making a difference in the world then after going through this. So it's all good. Thank you.
Thank you, Terri, and thanks to your listeners.
Really appreciate you coming. Thank you. We're WXRT and HD1 Chicago.